The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor of my auto shop when I heard my wife's voice drift through the thin office wall. She was talking on the phone, and her tone had that sickeningly sweet quality she reserved for people she was trying to impress. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. "Don't be so insecure, Danny," Lora was saying, her voice carrying that patronizing lilt that made my teeth ache. "My ex will be our baby's godfather. It's not like you're the only dad in the room." I stood there like a fool, oil stains on my coveralls, listening to my wife of 8 years dismiss me like I was some jealous teenager. The only dad in the room? What the hell was that supposed to mean? My name is Danny Sullivan, and I've been fixing cars in this godforsaken mill town of Millbrook, Massachusetts for 15 years. I inherited Sullivan's auto from my old man, along with his debts, his reputation for honest work, and his tendency to trust people who didn't deserve it. That last trait was about to bite me in the ass harder than a rabid pit bull. "Of course Marcus can be at the baby shower," Lora continued, her voice getting more animated. "He's been so supportive through everything. More supportive than some people, if you know what I mean." Marcus Brennan, her ex-boyfriend from law school, the golden boy who dumped her 5 years ago to marry some senator's daughter. The same Marcus who'd recently gotten divorced and had been sniffing around Lora like a dog in heat ever since she'd made partner at Whitman and Associates. I wiped my hands on a rag and moved closer to the office door. The smart thing would have been to walk away, to give my wife the privacy she deserved, but something in her tone made my stomach twist into knots. "Danny doesn't understand the legal world," she was saying now, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper. He's simple. Good with his hands, but not much upstairs, if you catch my drift." Simple. She called me simple. I'd put myself through night school to get my business degree while working 60-hour weeks to keep the shop afloat. I'd supported her through law school, living on ramen noodles and hope while she pursued her dreams. I'd held her hair back when she puked from morning sickness and assembled every piece of baby furniture in our nursery with these same simple hands. "The baby shower is this Saturday at the Lakeside Pavilion," Lora continued. "I can't wait for you to meet little Emma. She has your eyes, you know." Our daughter Emma was 3 months old. She had these striking green eyes that everyone commented on. Laura's eyes were brown. Mine were brown. But Marcus Brennan? That bastard had eyes like emeralds. I stumbled backward, knocking over a toolbox. The crash echoed through the shop like a gunshot. "Danny?" Lora called out. "Is everything okay out there?" "Fine," I managed to croak. "Just dropped something." But nothing was fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, going through the motions of replacing brake pads on Mrs. Henderson's Buick while my world crumbled around me. Every time I looked at my hands, I heard Lora's voice calling me simple. Every time I thought about Emma's green eyes, I felt like someone was driving a railroad spike through my chest. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table, picking at the meatloaf Lora had made, watching her feed Emma and looking for signs I'd been too blind to see. The way she held the baby at an angle that emphasized those green eyes. The way she'd been working late more often since Emma was born. The way she'd been distant in bed, claiming exhaustion from new motherhood. "You're quiet tonight," Lora said, not looking up from Emma's bottle. "Rough day at the shop?" "You could say that." I took a sip of beer, studying my wife's face. She was beautiful, no doubt about it. Shoulder-length auburn hair, sharp cheekbones, the kind of legs that looked killer in a courtroom skirt. I'd always wondered what she saw in a grease monkey like me. Now I was starting to think the answer was nothing. "I ran into Marcus at the courthouse today," she said casually, like she was mentioning the weather. "He's excited about being Emma's godfather. I thought we could have him over for dinner next week so you two can get to know each other better." "Can't wait," I said, my voice flat as roadkill. Lora finally looked at me, her lawyer instincts picking up on something in my tone. "Is there a problem with Marcus being the godfather? I thought we discussed this." We had discussed it, sort of. Lora had mentioned wanting to ask someone from her professional circle, someone who could be a good influence on Emma's future. I'd been half asleep at the time, exhausted from a 16-hour day trying to fix the transmission on a 1987 Chevy that should have been put out of its misery years ago. "No problem," I lied. "Just want what's best for Emma." That night, after Lora fell asleep, I crept into the nursery and stared down at my daughter. Emma was sleeping peacefully, her tiny fists curled next to her face. In the dim glow of the nightlight, those green eyes were closed, but I could picture them perfectly. "Are you mine, baby girl?" I whispered. "Or am I just the fool who's been paying the bills?" The next morning, I called my buddy Jake Morrison at the boxing gym. Jake was 10 years older than me, a former Golden Gloves champion who'd opened Morrison's gym after a career-ending injury. He was also the closest thing I had to a best friend in this town. "Danny boy," Jake answered on the second ring. "What's got you calling so early? Shop on fire?" "I need to talk to someone," I said, "and I need to hit something, hard." "Come on down, I'll put the coffee on." An hour later, I was pounding the heavy bag in Jake's gym while he sat on a folding chair, sipping coffee and listening to me spill my guts. "So let me get this straight," Jake said when I finished. "Your wife's ex is going to be your kid's godfather, and you think the kid might actually be his?" "That's about the size of it." I threw another combination at the bag, feeling my knuckles protest through the worn boxing gloves. "What are you going to do about it?" I stopped punching and turned to face him. "I don't know. Get a DNA test, I guess. Confront Lora. Probably get divorced and lose everything I've worked for." Jake shook his head. "Danny, you're thinking like a victim. That's not going to get you anywhere. What else am I supposed to think like? Like a man who's been played for a fool and wants to even the score." Jake stood up and walked over to me. "You want my advice? Don't do anything stupid, but don't do nothing either. If your wife and her ex think they can make you look like an idiot, maybe it's time to show them who they're really dealing with." That afternoon, I drove to the law office of Patricia Wells, the only lawyer in town who wasn't afraid to go up against the big firms like Whitman and Associates. Pat was a tough old bird who'd been practicing family law for 30 years. She'd handled my parents' wills and helped me navigate some business contracts over the years. "Danny Sullivan," she said when her secretary showed me into her office. "You look like hell. What's eating you?" I told her everything. The phone call, my suspicions about Emma's parentage, the upcoming baby shower where Marcus would be officially anointed as Godfather. Pat listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "First things first," she said when I finished. "We need to confirm your suspicions. I can arrange for a discrete DNA test, but we'll need a sample from the baby and from this Marcus character." "How do we get a sample from him?" Pat smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Leave that to me. In the meantime, I want you to start documenting everything. Keep a journal of your wife's activities, her late nights, her phone calls. If this goes where I think it's going, we'll need ammunition." "What about the baby shower?" "That's actually perfect timing." Pat leaned back in her chair. "Public events create opportunities. Bring me something with Marcus's DNA on it, a beer bottle, a coffee cup, anything he puts his mouth on. I'll handle the rest." I left Pat's office feeling like I had a plan for the first time in days. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than sitting around feeling sorry for myself. The baby shower was being held at the Millbrook Lake Pavilion, a rustic venue that Lora had rented because it photographed well for her social media. She'd invited about 30 people, mostly her colleagues from the law firm, some neighbors, and a few of my friends who she deemed presentable enough for her crowd. I spent Saturday morning helping set up tables and hanging decorations, playing the role of the devoted husband while my insides churned with rage and suspicion. Lora was in her element, directing traffic and making sure everything was perfect for her big day. Marcus arrived fashionably late, driving a silver BMW and wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He was everything I wasn't: tall, polished, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged in a courtroom or a country club. When he hugged Lora hello, I noticed how his hands lingered on her waist, how she leaned into him just a little too long. "You must be Danny," Marcus said, extending his hand to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," I replied, gripping his hand harder than necessary. "Of course. Lora tells me you're quite the mechanic. Very hands-on work." The condescension in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. This bastard thought he was better than me, and he wasn't even trying to hide it. The shower proceeded like these things always do: games, gifts, and endless cooing over the baby. I played my part, smiling and thanking people for their generosity while keeping one eye on Marcus. He was working the room like a politician, charming the other guests and making himself indispensable to Lora. When it came time for the gift opening, Marcus presented Lora with an elaborate basket filled with expensive baby items and a card that made her eyes light up. I couldn't see what it said, but whatever it was made her blush and give him another one of those lingering hugs. That's when I made my move. While everyone was distracted by the gift opening, I casually walked over to where Marcus had left his beer bottle on a side table. I palmed it and slipped it into the cooler I'd brought, making sure it was wrapped in a napkin to preserve any DNA evidence. "Enjoying the party?" I turned to find Lisa Chen, Laura's best friend and maid of honor at our wedding, standing behind me with a knowing smile. Lisa was a social worker who'd known Lora since college. She was one of the few people in Lora's circle who'd always been nice to me. "It's great," I said. "Lora's really outdone herself." "She has, hasn't she?" Lisa's smile seemed strained. "Can I talk to you for a minute? Privately?" We walked to the edge of the pavilion, away from the crowd. Lisa looked nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap. "Danny, I need to tell you something, but I don't know how to say it." My heart started pounding. "Just say it." "I've been Lora's friend for a long time, and I love her like a sister, but what she's doing to you isn't right." Lisa took a deep breath. "The thing is, this whole Godfather situation, it's not what you think." "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's worse than you think." Lisa glanced back at the party, making sure we weren't being overheard. "Lora and Marcus have been involved since before Emma was born. But that's not the worst part." I felt like I was going to throw up. "What's the worst part?" "The worst part is that I've been helping them cover it up." Lisa's confession hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "You've been helping them?" I managed to croak. "Not by choice," Lisa said quickly. "Lora has something on me, something that could ruin my career and my marriage. She's been blackmailing me into keeping quiet about her affair and into feeding her information about what you've been up to." "What kind of information?" "Your schedule, your moods, whether you've been suspicious. She wanted to know if you were catching on." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "Danny, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to be part of this, but Lora, she can be very persuasive when she wants something." I looked back at the party, watching my wife laugh at something Marcus had whispered in her ear while she held our daughter. The rage that had been simmering in my chest for days suddenly boiled over. "How long?" I asked. "The affair? It started about 6 months before Emma was born. But the planning? Danny, they've been planning this whole thing for over a year." "Planning what?" Lisa looked around nervously. "They want you out of the picture, but they want to do it in a way that leaves Lora looking like the victim. The plan is to make you look unstable, maybe violent. Then Lora files for divorce, gets full custody of Emma, and takes half of everything you own." "And Marcus?" "He gets Lora and the baby. Plus he looks like the hero who rescued them from an abusive husband." Lisa wiped her eyes. "They've been setting you up, Danny. All those times Lora came home late and picked fights with you, she was documenting everything, making it look like you were controlling and jealous." I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my life, was a lie. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't live with myself anymore, and because—" Lisa hesitated. "Because they're planning to make their move soon, like really soon." "What do you mean?" "Next week, Lora is going to file a restraining order against you. She's going to claim that you've been threatening her and the baby. Marcus has been coaching her on what to say, and they've got witnesses lined up to back up her story." My vision started to blur around the edges. "Witnesses?" "People from her firm, some of the neighbors. They've been told that you've been acting erratically, that Lora is afraid for her safety." Lisa grabbed my arm. "Danny, once that restraining order goes through, you'll be kicked out of your own house. You won't be able to see Emma, and Lora will have grounds for an emergency custody hearing." I looked back at the party one more time. Lora was opening another gift, smiling and laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. Marcus was standing behind her, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. They looked like the perfect family. "I need to go," I said. "Danny, wait. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not going down without a fight." I walked back to the party, grabbed my cooler with Marcus's beer bottle, and headed for my truck. Lora called out to me as I was leaving. "Danny, where are you going? We haven't cut the cake yet." "Emergency at the shop," I called back. "Mrs. Peterson's car broke down on Route 9. I'll be back later." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that Lora would believe. Good old reliable Danny, always putting work before family. It would probably end up in her divorce filing as evidence of my neglect. I drove straight to Pat Wells' office, even though it was Saturday. I knew she'd be there. Pat worked 7 days a week and had for as long as I'd known her. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Pat said when she let me into her office through the back entrance. I told her about my conversation with Lisa, about the restraining order and the custody plan. Pat listened grimly, taking notes. "They're smart," she admitted, "and they're playing for keeps. But they made one mistake." "What's that?" "They underestimated you." Pat leaned forward. "Danny, what I'm about to suggest isn't exactly orthodox, but if what you're telling me is true, we need to move fast, and we need to hit hard." "I'm listening." "First, we get that DNA test done immediately. I have a contact at a private lab who can have results back in 24 hours if we pay extra. Second, we start building our own case against Lora and Marcus. What kind of case? Fraud, for starters. If Emma isn't your biological daughter and Lora has been claiming child support or benefits based on false paternity, that's a felony. If Marcus has been involved in the deception, he's an accessory. But what about the restraining order? Pat smiled that predatory smile again. Let me worry about that. I've got some ideas. Sunday morning, I was back at Pat's office with the DNA results. Emma was not my biological daughter. The test showed a 99.97% probability that Marcus Brennan was her father. I stared at the papers in my hands, feeling something inside me die. For 3 months, I'd loved that little girl with everything I had. I'd gotten up for 2 a.m. feedings, changed diapers, sung lullabies. I'd imagined teaching her to ride a bike, walking her down the aisle at her wedding, being the kind of father mine had never been to me. I'm sorry, Danny, Pat said quietly. So what now? Now we go to war. Pat's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of waiting for Lora to make her move, we were going to beat her to the punch. Monday morning, while Lora was at work and Emma was at daycare, I was going to file for divorce and request an emergency custody hearing based on Lora's adultery and fraud. But Emma's not even my daughter, I protested. Legally she is until a court says otherwise. You're on the birth certificate, you've been acting as her father, and you've been financially supporting her. In Massachusetts, that gives you parental rights regardless of biology. And the restraining order? Hard to get a restraining order against someone who's already filed documented evidence of your spouse's infidelity and deception. It makes their claims look vindictive rather than protective. Sunday night, I sat in my living room watching Lora put Emma to bed, knowing it might be the last normal evening we'd ever have as a family. Not that we'd ever really been a family. That had all been an illusion. You're quiet tonight, Lora said when she came downstairs. Everything okay? Just tired, I said. Long weekend. She settled onto the couch next to me, curling up against my side like she used to when we were first married. For a moment, I almost forgot that she'd been lying to me for months. Danny, I know I've been distant lately, she said. The new partnership has been demanding, and adjusting to motherhood has been harder than I expected. But I want you to know that I love you. The words should have melted my heart. Instead, they made me feel sick. I love you too, I lied. That night, I lay awake listening to Lora breathe beside me, memorizing the sound. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the war would begin. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I waited until Lora left for work, then called in sick to the shop and drove to the courthouse. Pat was waiting for me with a stack of papers. Last chance to back out, she said. I'm not backing out. Good, because once we file these papers, there's no going back. Lora and Marcus are going to come at you with everything they've got. Let them come. We filed the divorce petition at 9:15 a.m. By 9:30, we'd requested an emergency custody hearing and filed a motion to freeze all joint assets pending the outcome of the proceedings. By 10 a.m., we'd submitted the DNA evidence and a sworn affidavit detailing Lora's adultery. How long before Lora finds out? I asked as we left the courthouse. She'll be served at her office within the hour, Pat said. After that, all hell is going to break loose. She was right. My phone started ringing at 11:30 a.m. Lora's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. She called 6 more times in the next hour. When I finally listened to the messages, her tone progressed from confused to angry to absolutely furious. Danny, what the hell is going on? I just got served with divorce papers at my office, in front of my colleagues. Call me back right now. The final message was different. Her voice was cold, controlled, her lawyer voice. Danny, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you just made the biggest mistake of your life. When I'm done with you, you won't have a pot to piss in, and you'll never see Emma again. That evening, I was working late at the shop when Jake Morrison showed up with a 6-pack of beer and a grim expression. Heard through the grapevine that you filed for divorce today, he said. Town's buzzing about it. Good news travels fast. Danny, I've got to ask, are you sure you know what you're doing? Lora's got connections in this town. She could make life very difficult for you. She already has been making life difficult for me. The only difference is now I'm fighting back. Jake cracked open 2 beers and handed me one. Fair enough. So what's your next move? Wait for the custody hearing and hope Pat's strategy works. And if it doesn't? I took a long pull from my beer, tasting the bitterness. Then I guess I'll find out just how much I can lose. We were sitting there in comfortable silence when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You have no idea who you're messing with. Drop the divorce or you'll regret it. I showed the message to Jake. He frowned. That from Lora? A different number. Could be Marcus. Or could be someone else entirely. Jake's expression darkened. Danny, you need to be careful. If Lora and her boyfriend are as ruthless as you think they are, they might not stop at legal threats. As if on cue, the lights in the shop suddenly went out. We sat there in complete darkness, listening to the sound of our own breathing. Probably just a blown fuse, I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. Jake was already on his feet, moving toward the window. Danny, there's someone outside. I grabbed a flashlight from my toolbox and crept toward the front window of the shop. Jake was right. There was definitely someone moving around in the parking lot, trying to stay in the shadows. Can you see who it is? Jake whispered. Too dark? I moved to the side window, trying to get a better angle. Looks like 2 people, maybe 3. That's when we heard the sound of breaking glass from the back of the shop. Bastard, I muttered, grabbing a tire iron from the workbench. Someone's breaking in. Jake picked up a wrench. Should we call the cops? And tell them what? That my estranged wife's boyfriend is vandalizing my shop? They'll be gone by the time the police get here. We made our way toward the back of the shop, using the flashlight sparingly to avoid giving away our position. The back door was standing open, glass crunching under our feet from the broken window. Danny Sullivan! A voice called out from the darkness outside. We need to talk. I recognized the voice immediately. Marcus Brennan, sounding a lot less polished than he had at the baby shower. We don't have anything to talk about, Marcus, I called back. You want to communicate? Do it through lawyers. This doesn't have to get ugly, Danny. Just drop the divorce and we can all move on with our lives. Like you moved on with my wife? There was a pause, then Marcus stepped into the light spilling from my flashlight. He wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, both bigger than me and looking like they'd be more comfortable in a gym than a courtroom. Lora made a mistake, Marcus said, but that doesn't mean we have to destroy each other over it. A mistake? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. She's been lying to me for months. She let me believe Emma was my daughter. She was planning to have me thrown out of my own house. That's not a mistake, Marcus. That's a conspiracy. The kid is better off with us, one of Marcus's companions said. He was a thick-set guy with the kind of neck that suggested steroid use. You're just a grease monkey. What kind of future can you give her? Better than what she'll get from a lying whore and her boyfriend, I shot back. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Thick-Neck took a step forward, cracking his knuckles. You want to watch your mouth when you're talking about Lora, he said. Or what? You're going to beat me up in my own shop? That's going to look great in court. Jake stepped up beside me, wrench in hand. Actually, it's going to look like self-defense when we're done with you, assholes. Marcus held up a hand, stopping his muscle from advancing. This doesn't have to get physical. Danny, I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. I'm listening. Drop the divorce. Sign over your parental rights to Emma. In exchange, Lora will give you a clean break. No alimony, no asset division. You keep your shop, she keeps the house and the kid. Everyone walks away. And if I don't? Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. Then things get complicated. Laura's prepared to testify that you've been physically abusive. We've got witnesses who'll back up her story. By the time we're done with you, you'll be lucky to avoid jail time, let alone see a penny from the divorce. You're talking about perjury. I'm talking about different perspectives on the same events. Laura's perspective is that you're a violent, unstable man who shouldn't be around children. My perspective is that you're a reasonable guy who just needs to see the bigger picture. I looked at Jake, who was gripping his wrench like he was planning to use it. Then I looked back at Marcus and his 2 friends. Here's my perspective, I said. You and your hired muscle have about 30 seconds to get off my property before I call the police and report a break-in. Danny, 25 seconds. Marcus's facade of reasonableness finally cracked. You're making a big mistake, Sullivan. Lora and I have resources you can't even imagine. We'll bury you. 20 seconds. This isn't over. 15 seconds. Marcus jerked his head at his companions, and they started backing toward the broken door. You should have taken the deal, Danny. Now you're going to find out what happens to people who don't know their place. They disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jake and me standing in the wreckage of my shop's back room. Well, that was subtle, Jake said. Think they'll be back? Count on it. I surveyed the damage. Broken window, scattered tools, a puddle of motor oil where someone had knocked over a container. But next time, I'll be ready for them. The next morning, I called Pat Wells and told her about the late-night visit. She listened without interruption, then sighed heavily. They're escalating faster than I expected, she said. The good news is that if you can prove Marcus was behind the break-in, it undermines their credibility. The bad news is that it means they're desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. What kind of stupid things? The kind that could get you hurt. Danny, I think you should consider staying somewhere else for a few days, just until the custody hearing. I'm not running from these bastards. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to be smart. If something happens to you before the hearing, Lora gets everything by default. She had a point. I arranged to stay at Jake's place above the gym, and I had a security system installed at the shop. I also did something I'd never thought I'd do. I bought a gun. The sporting goods store owner, Bill Hendricks, was an old customer of mine. He didn't ask questions when I told him I needed something for home protection, just walked me through the basics of handgun safety, and helped me pick out a .38 revolver that would be reliable and easy to use. You planning on shooting anyone in particular? Bill asked as he rang up the sale. Just want to be prepared. Uh-huh. Bill gave me a look that said he'd heard about my divorce proceedings. Well, if you do have to use it, make sure you're on your own property and make sure they're armed. Self-defense is a lot easier to prove than murder. That evening, I was practicing at the shooting range when my phone rang. Lora's number flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello, Lora. Danny, we need to talk. Her voice was different. Not angry, not cold, but tired. Can you meet me somewhere? Just the two of us? I don't think that's a good idea. Please, there are things you don't understand, things I need to explain. Like how Emma isn't my daughter? There was a long pause. How did you? She caught herself. Danny, please. One conversation. Then if you still want to go through with the divorce, I won't fight you. You won't fight me. Lora, you've been planning to destroy me for months. That's not true. It's complicated. Complicated how? Meet me at Murphy's Bar in an hour. I'll explain everything. Murphy's Bar was a dive on the wrong side of town, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. It was also public enough that Lora couldn't try anything stupid. 1 hour, I said. And Lora? If Marcus or his friends show up, I'm walking out. It'll just be me, I promise. I arrived at Murphy's early and took a booth in the back where I could see the door. The bartender, Tommy Murphy, was an old friend who'd served me many beers over the years. He nodded when I walked in but didn't say anything. Tommy had a gift for reading situations. Lora arrived exactly on time, looking nothing like the polished lawyer I'd married. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked young and vulnerable, like the girl I'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. Thank you for coming, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. Talk. She took a deep breath. Danny, I know how this looks. I know you think I'm some kind of monster who's been planning to betray you, but that's not what happened. Then what did happen? I made a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. When Marcus came back to town after his divorce, I was feeling neglected. You were working all the time, I was pregnant and hormonal, and he was paying attention to me. So you slept with him? Yes. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. It only happened a few times, and I regretted it immediately. But then Emma was born, and she had his eyes, and I knew you'd figure it out eventually. So you decided to frame me as an abusive husband? No, that was Marcus's idea. He said if I didn't go along with it, he'd tell you about the affair anyway, but he'd make it look like I was the one who seduced him. He said he'd ruin my career, make sure I lost Emma. I stared at her, trying to decide if she was telling the truth or if this was just another manipulation. What about Lisa? She said you'd been blackmailing her. Lora's face crumpled. That's true. But Danny, I was desperate. Marcus had pictures, recordings of our conversations. He was blackmailing me too. What kind of pictures? The kind that would end my career and destroy any chance I'd have of getting custody of Emma. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. Danny, I know I've made terrible choices, but I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. You have a funny way of showing it. I know, but it's not too late. We can fix this. How? Help me get away from Marcus. He's not the man I thought he was. He's dangerous, Danny. I'm scared of what he might do if I try to leave him. I leaned back in the booth, studying my wife's face. Either she was telling the truth, or she was a better actress than I'd given her credit for. What are you proposing? We work together to expose Marcus. You have resources, connections in this town that I don't have. Help me gather evidence against him, and I'll testify to everything, the affair, the blackmail, the plan to frame you. And Emma? We'll figure that out. Maybe joint custody. I know she's not biologically yours, but you're the only father she's ever known. I wanted to believe her. God help me. I wanted to believe that the woman I'd loved for 8 years was still in there somewhere, buried under the lies and the fear. I need time to think about it. Danny, we don't have time. The custody hearing is in 3 days. If we're going to do this, we have to move now. What exactly are you asking me to do? Lora reached across the table and took my hand. Help me destroy Marcus Brennan before he destroys both of us. For a moment, sitting there in that dingy bar with my wife's hand in mine, I almost said yes. Almost let myself believe that we could salvage something from the wreckage of our marriage. Then I remembered Marcus's visit to my shop, his threats, his casual assumption that I was too weak and stupid to fight back. Okay, I said, let's destroy the bastard. But even as I said the words, I was thinking about Pat Wells's advice about desperate people doing stupid things, because I was starting to realize that the most desperate person in this whole mess might be me. Lora and I spent the next 2 hours at Murphy's bar planning Marcus Brennan's downfall. She told me about his real estate business, which apparently involved some creative interpretations of zoning laws and building codes. She told me about his gambling debts and his cocaine habit. Most importantly, she told me about a safe in his home office where he kept compromising materials on various people around town, including the photos and recordings he was using to blackmail her. He's paranoid about digital security, Lora explained. Everything's on paper or old-fashioned film. He thinks it makes him untouchable. How do we get access to the safe? Thursday night, he's got a poker game at the country club. He'll be gone from 8 until at least midnight. I still have a key to his house from before. You want me to break into his house? It's not breaking in if I let you in with a key. Laura's lawyer instincts were showing. Besides, we're just retrieving stolen property. Those photos belong to me. I had to admit, the plan had a certain appeal. Marcus had made this personal when he showed up at my shop with his muscle. It was time to return the favor. What about the safe combination? Lora smiled for the first time all evening. His birthday backwards, followed by the year he graduated law school. The man's not as smart as he thinks he is. We arranged to meet Thursday night at 8:30 p.m. at the parking lot of the old mill, 2 blocks from Marcus's house. I'd bring tools to deal with the safe if the combination didn't work, and Lora would provide access and serve as lookout. Danny, Lora said as we prepared to leave Murphy's, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but can you ever forgive me? I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd shared my bed for 8 years, who'd borne a child I'd thought was mine, who'd been planning to destroy me until her co-conspirator turned on her. I don't know, I said honestly, but maybe we can start with getting our lives back from Marcus. Wednesday crawled by like a wounded animal. I went through the motions at the shop, but my mind was on the plan. I kept thinking about what Pat Wells had said about desperate people doing stupid things. Breaking into Marcus's house definitely qualified as stupid, but I was past caring about the legal niceties. Thursday evening, I loaded my truck with a small toolkit, lockpicks, a stethoscope for safe cracking, a small crowbar in case finesse didn't work. I also tucked the .38 into my jacket pocket. I didn't plan on using it, but after Marcus's visit to my shop, I wasn't taking any chances. The old mill parking lot was deserted when I arrived. Laura's car was already there, and she was sitting behind the wheel looking nervous. I parked next to her and got out. You sure about this? I asked. No, but I'm sure about what happens if we don't do it. She handed me a key and a piece of paper with the safe combination written on it. The office is on the 2nd floor, first door on the right. The safe is behind a painting of some old sailing ship. How long do I have? The poker game usually runs until midnight, but I'll text you if he leaves early. We synchronized our watches like we were planning a military operation instead of a burglary. Then I walked the 2 blocks to Marcus's house, a Victorian mansion in the historic district that probably cost more than I'd make in 10 years. The key worked perfectly. I slipped inside and made my way up the carpeted stairs, using a small flashlight to navigate. The house was expensively decorated but cold, like a museum exhibit rather than a home. Marcus's office was exactly where Lora had said it would be. The safe was behind the sailing ship painting, just as she'd described. I tried the combination first. It worked on the 2nd attempt. Marcus really wasn't as smart as he thought he was. The safe was packed with files, photographs, and what looked like recording devices. I started pulling everything out, using my phone to photograph documents before putting them back. There were files on at least a dozen prominent people in town, the mayor, several city council members, a judge, and the police chief. Marcus had been busy building his own private intelligence network. Laura's file was near the back. Well, the photographs were as bad as she'd implied. Explicit shots of her and Marcus in various compromising positions. There were also recordings of their conversations, including several where they discussed their plan to frame me as an abusive husband, but it was another file that made my blood run cold. A file with my name on it. Marcus had been investigating me for months. He knew about my business finances, my personal habits, even my friendship with Jake Morrison. There were photographs of me at the shop, at Murphy's bar, at the gun range. The bastard had been stalking me. The most disturbing part was a handwritten note in Marcus's writing. DS becoming a problem. May need permanent solution. Check with TN about options. TN had to be thick neck, the muscle from the shop visit. And permanent solution didn't sound like legal terminology. I was photographing the contents of my file when my phone buzzed with a text from Lora. He's leaving the club early. Get out now. I shoved everything back into the safe, closed it, and repositioned the painting. Then I grabbed Lora's file, the physical evidence, not just photos, and headed for the stairs. I was halfway down when I heard a car door slam outside. Moving as quickly and quietly as I could, I made it to the back door and slipped out into the garden. I could hear Marcus's voice from the front of the house, talking to someone on his phone. No, I'm telling you something's not right. Lora's been acting weird all day, and that bastard Sullivan is up to something. I crept along the side of the house, staying in the shadows. Marcus was still on the phone, standing in his driveway. Yeah, I know we agreed to wait until after the hearing, but maybe we should move up the timeline. The longer we wait, the more chances he has to cause problems. I made it to the street and started walking casually toward the mill parking lot, Lora's file tucked inside my jacket. Behind me, I could hear Marcus entering his house. Lora was waiting anxiously in her car when I got back to the parking lot. Did you get it? She asked. I handed her the file. Your photos and recordings are in there, but Lora, we've got bigger problems. I told her about my file and Marcus's note about a permanent solution. He's planning to have me killed, I said. Lora went pale. Danny, I had no idea he was thinking about anything like that. When he talked about getting rid of you, I thought he meant legally. Well, now we know better. I started my truck. The question is, what are we going to do about it? We take this to the police. With what? Evidence we obtained by breaking into his house? Even if they believed us, anything we found would be inadmissible in court. Lora slumped in her seat. So what do we do? We make sure Marcus doesn't get the chance to implement his permanent solution. What does that mean? I looked at her through the truck window, this woman who'd betrayed me and was now asking me to save her from the consequences of that betrayal. It means we're going to war, Lora, and this time we're going to win. But as I drove home to Jake's place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Marcus's plan to kill me was certainly a problem, but it seemed almost too convenient that Lora had suddenly developed a conscience just when her co-conspirator was turning on her. Either she was telling the truth about being blackmailed and manipulated, or she was playing a deeper game than I'd realized. Given everything that had happened, I was starting to think the latter was more likely, which meant I was going to have to be very careful about who I trusted in the war that was coming. Friday morning brought news that changed everything. Pat Wells called me at 6 a.m. with an update that made my blood run cold. Danny, we've got a problem. Marcus Brennan filed an emergency motion last night claiming that you broke into his house and threatened him. He's asking for an immediate restraining order and wants the custody hearing moved up to today. How did he know? Good question. Either he figured it out on his own, or someone told him. Pat's voice was grim. Danny, did you tell anyone about your plan to search his house? I thought about my conversation with Lora at Murphy's bar. Only Lora. Then either she's still working with Marcus, or his surveillance of you is better than we thought. What happens now? Emergency hearing at 2 p.m. today. Judge Morrison is presiding. Pat paused. Danny, you need to know, Judge Morrison is in Marcus's file. If Marcus has compromising information on him, this hearing could go very badly for us. I sat on the edge of Jake's couch, trying to process this latest development. Every move I made, Marcus seemed to be 2 steps ahead. Pat, what if I told you I had evidence that Marcus was planning to have me killed? What kind of evidence? I told her about the file and the note about a permanent solution. That's problematic, Pat said carefully. If you can prove it, it would certainly change the dynamic, but if you obtained it illegally... I know, it's inadmissible. Not necessarily. There might be a way to use it without revealing how you got it. Let me think about this. After I hung up with Pat, I sat there trying to figure out my next move. The walls were closing in, and I was running out of options. Marcus had outplayed me at every turn, and now he was moving in for the kill. Literally. That's when Jake came downstairs from his apartment, already dressed for his morning workout. You look like hell, he said. Rough night? I told him about the break-in and the emergency hearing. Jake listened without interruption, then poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. Danny, can I ask you something? Shoot. Are you absolutely sure Lora's on your side now? What do you mean? I mean, think about the timing. She approaches you right after you file for divorce, tells you this sob story about being blackmailed, convinces you to break into Marcus's house, and then Marcus somehow knows exactly what happened and files an emergency motion. Jake took a sip of coffee. That's either one hell of a coincidence or you're being played. You think Lora set me up. I think Lora's a lawyer who's been planning to screw you over for months. I think she's smart enough to realize that her original plan wasn't working, so she switched to plan B. Which is? Make you look like an unstable stalker who's escalating to criminal behavior, break into her lover's house, threaten him, maybe do something stupid at the custody hearing. By the time she's done with you, Marcus looks like the hero and you look like the villain. The more I thought about it, the more sense Jake's theory made. Lora had played me perfectly, appealing to my desire for revenge while maneuvering me into a position where I'd destroy myself. So what do I do? You stop playing their game and start playing your own. Meaning? Jake smiled, and it reminded me of his expression back when he was boxing professionally and had just figured out his opponent's weakness. Meaning it's time to remind these people that they're not the only ones who can play dirty. At 1:30 p.m., I walked into the courthouse for the emergency hearing. Lora was there with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman from her firm. Marcus was there with his own legal team, looking smug and confident. Judge Morrison, a thin man in his 60s, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Pat Wells met me at the defendant's table with a thick file folder and a grim expression. How bad is this going to be? I whispered. Depends on how much fight you've got left in you, she whispered back. Marcus's lawyer went first, painting me as an unstable man who'd escalated from verbal threats to breaking and entering. He presented security camera footage from a neighbor's house showing someone matching my description in the area of Marcus's home Thursday night. Your Honor, the lawyer said, Mr. Sullivan represents a clear and present danger to my client and to the child in question. We're asking for an immediate restraining order and emergency custody placement. Judge Morrison looked at me with obvious distaste. Mr. Sullivan, how do you respond to these allegations? I started to stand, but Pat put a hand on my arm. Your Honor, Pat said, we'd like to present evidence that Mr. Brennan has been engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation against my client. What kind of evidence? Pat opened her file folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. Security footage from Mr. Sullivan's auto shop showing Mr. Brennan and two unidentified men breaking into the premises and making threats. Marcus's lawyer jumped up. Objection. We haven't seen this evidence. Because it was just delivered to us this morning, Pat said smoothly. We also have recordings of threatening phone calls and text messages. Judge Morrison looked confused. Mr. Wells, are you alleging that Mr. Brennan has been harassing your client? I'm alleging much more than that, Your Honor. Pat pulled out another document. We have evidence that Mr. Brennan has been conducting illegal surveillance of my client and has made written threats against his life. That's preposterous, Marcus's lawyer sputtered. Is it? Pat walked over to Marcus's table and dropped a copy of his handwritten note about a permanent solution in front of him. Can you explain this note in your client's handwriting, counselor? The courtroom went silent. Marcus had gone pale, and his lawyer was frantically whispering in his ear. Judge Morrison picked up the note and read it. His expression darkened. Mr. Brennan, can you explain what permanent solution refers to in this context? Marcus stood up slowly. Your Honor, that note has been taken out of context. It refers to a business matter, not anything involving Mr. Sullivan. Really? Pat said. Then perhaps you can explain why Mr. Sullivan's initials are written at the top of the note. That is, Your Honor, Pat continued, we believe Mr. Brennan has been orchestrating an elaborate scheme to defraud my client of his parental rights and his property. We have evidence of adultery, conspiracy, and now threats of violence. Judge Morrison looked like he was getting a headache. This is highly irregular. Mr. Wells, how did you obtain this evidence? Through entirely legal means, Your Honor. The security footage is from my client's own property. The note was provided by a confidential informant who feared for my client's safety. I glanced over at Lora, who was staring at Pat with a mixture of admiration and terror. Her lawyer was frantically taking notes. Your Honor, Marcus's lawyer said, even if this evidence is authentic, it doesn't change the fact that Mr. Sullivan broke into my client's home. Actually, Pat said, we dispute that allegation entirely. Mr. Sullivan was at Morrison's gym Thursday evening from 8 p.m. until midnight. We have multiple witnesses who can verify his whereabouts. Jake Morrison stood up in the gallery. That's correct, Your Honor. Danny was helping me with inventory all evening. It was a lie, of course, but it was the kind of lie that would be impossible to disprove, especially since Jake's gym didn't have security cameras. Judge Morrison rubbed his temples. This is turning into a circus. I'm going to recess for 30 minutes while I review all this evidence. During the recess, I found myself alone with Lora in the hallway outside the courtroom. Her lawyer was on the phone, and Marcus was huddled with his legal team. Danny, Lora said quietly, I need you to know that I didn't tell Marcus about Thursday night. Then how did he know? I think he's been watching both of us, listening to our phone calls, following us. He's more paranoid than I realized. Or you're still lying to me. Lora's eyes filled with tears. I know you don't have any reason to trust me, but Danny, I'm scared. If Marcus thinks I betrayed him, then maybe you should have thought of that before you got involved with him in the first place. I know I made terrible choices, but please don't let him win. Don't let him take Emma away from both of us. Before I could respond, Pat Wells appeared at my elbow. Danny, we need to talk, now. She pulled me into an empty conference room and closed the door. That was some performance in there, I said. It's not over yet. Judge Morrison is dirty. I can see it in his eyes. He's going to try to find a way to rule in Marcus's favor without looking completely corrupt. So what do we do? Pat smiled. We give him a way out. Danny, I need you to trust me and follow my lead when we go back in there. Can you do that? Do I have a choice? Not if you want to see Emma again. When court resumed, Judge Morrison looked like he'd aged 10 years during the recess. After reviewing the evidence, he said, I find myself in an unprecedented situation. Both parties have presented credible allegations of misconduct against the other. Here it comes, I thought. He's going to split the baby and give Marcus what he wants while appearing impartial. Therefore, Judge Morrison continued, I'm ordering a full investigation by the district attorney's office into all allegations of harassment, intimidation, and conspiracy. Until that investigation is complete, I'm awarding temporary custody of the minor child to the state. The courtroom erupted. Lora gasped, Marcus's lawyer started objecting, and Pat Wells just smiled. Furthermore, Judge Morrison said, raising his voice over the chaos, I'm issuing mutual restraining orders. Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Brennan are to have no contact with each other or with Mrs. Sullivan pending the outcome of the investigation. Your Honor, Lora's lawyer said, what about my client's parental rights? Mrs. Sullivan will be allowed supervised visitation pending the investigation. Given the serious nature of these allegations, I believe this is the most prudent course of action. As the judge gavelled the session closed, I turned to Pat with confusion. What just happened? You just won, Pat said quietly. Morrison couldn't rule for Marcus without looking corrupt, but he couldn't rule for you without ignoring the break-in allegations, so he punted to the DA's office. But Emma's in state custody now. Temporarily. And when the investigation clears you of wrongdoing, which it will, since Jake's alibi is solid, you'll get her back. Meanwhile, Marcus is going to be too busy dealing with criminal charges to cause you any more problems. As we left the courthouse, I saw Marcus standing by his BMW, talking angrily on his phone. When he saw me, his expression turned murderous. This isn't over, Sullivan, he called out. Yeah, it is, I called back. You just don't know it yet. But as I drove home to Jake's place, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was right. This wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase, one that might be even more dangerous than what had come before. Because men like Marcus Brennan didn't accept defeat gracefully, and when they were cornered, they became unpredictable. I was about to find out just how unpredictable. That night, Jake's gym burned to the ground. The fire department called it arson, but they couldn't prove who was responsible. Jake and I stood in the parking lot watching 20 years of his life go up in smoke, and we both knew exactly who had done it. I'm sorry, I told him. This is my fault. No, Jake said quietly. This is war. And in war, innocent people get hurt. He turned to look at me, his face illuminated by the flames. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I watched Marcus's handiwork consume my best friend's livelihood and made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to finish this, I said, once and for all.